please. Okay, good evening and good day to all participants. I would like to inform you that the event will be recorded. So, on behalf of the Max Weber Scholar Network, I would like to welcome you to our 5th session in the series Max Weber as a Political Theorist, ? Today on the topic Political Theory or Political Theology, Max Weber's theory of the political. And maybe we will find an answer to our overwhelming question tonight or today. So I want to apologize to Victor Strazieri, who is currently on the flight back from Brazil. Today, the podium is very international, German, Portuguese, and Spanish. So we are very happy about this because that's what we want with our international Weber Scholars Network. Before I hand over the discussion and the introduction to the topic, I like to introduce Joaquín Abellán. I am very pleased, Joaquín, that you have agreed to moderate today's session. Joaquín Abellán is Professor Emeritus of Political Science in the Universitat Complutense de Madrid. Since his dissertation, he has been very closely connected to German intellectual history and its thinkers. The spectrum ranges from Wilhelm von Humboldt to Kant and Hegel, and of course to Max Weber. Through his many translations of Weber, he is an important mediator of Max Weber to the Spanish-speaking world. And here in our library, we have a lot of translations you made, Joaquín. For instance, the Protestant Ethic, the political writings. What I love very much is the 3rd chapter of Economy and Society with the 3 types of rule or domination, and the sociological categories, and of course the 2 famous speeches, Politics and Science as a Vocation, and very special the translation of the Psychophysik der industriellen Arbeit. So these are many, many translations and very important. But Joaquín has also very broad interests in research, and they range from natural law theories to liberalism and nationalism, especially in Germany. And most recently, he worked intensively on Weber's concept of plebiscitary democracy. He also spoke about this topic in the wonderful International Weber Conference in Madrid in November 2022. This was the last time we met personally. And therefore, Joaquín Abellán is predestined to lead today's discussion. So, Joaquín, it's up to you.
Thank you, Edith. It's a pleasure to be with all of you in this meeting. I thank you for inviting me to act as a moderator of the meeting. And but above all, I'd like to present 2 experts in political theory. We have the pleasure to have the company of Professor Philip Manow, and Dr. Miguel and Pedro Magalhães. Professor Manow has been, I didn't know how many people were going to come, and I prepared a couple of sentences about his academic career. Professor Philip Manow has been professor of political science at the universities of Constance and Heidelberg, and professor of comparative political economy at Bremen University. Recently, he has been appointed professor of international political economy at the University of Siegen. One of his most famous books is probably The Political Economy of Populism, where Professor Manow analyzes the various types of populism in Europe. For Professor Manow, the fundamental key to understanding the different types of populism in Europe, left-wing and right-wing populism, is the differences between the economic and social strata in the member states of the European Union. He attributes populist protest to two globalization processes: international trade and migration. You will his book named Thailand Biden, as we have been recommended to read a chapter of it in preparation for today's meeting. I would also like to mention a paper by him entitled Max Weber und die Demokratie, published in 2022 in the book edited by Schmitt and Bachmann, Max Weber Revisited, zur Aktualität eines Klasses. I would like to now introduce Dr. Pedro Magalhães. Today, he will be providing comments on Professor Manow's presentation. Dr. Magalhães is currently Assistant Professor for Political Science at the University of Minho in Braga, Portugal. He obtained the PhD in Political Science at Nova University Lisbon in 2016, with a doctoral thesis on charismatic leadership, the crisis of liberalism, and the iron cage of modernity, in which he makes a comparative study of Max Weber, Hans Kelsen, and Carl Schmitt. Among his many publications, I would like to highlight two journal articles. In 2016, A Contingent Affinity, Max Weber, Carl Schmitt, and the Challenge of Modern Politics, published in Journal of the History of Ideas. And one second, in 2022, Charisma and Democracy, Max Weber on the Riddle of Political Change in Modern Society, published in Topoi, an international review of philosophy. And after that, now I would like to give the floor to Professor Manow. Hermano, you have 20 to maximum 30 minutes to make your presentation. Please.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Abellán, for the nice introduction. Thank you very much, the Weber Scholarly Network, for the invitation. I'm very much honored by it, and I'm very grateful to present some thoughts relating to a book which has already been mentioned, named Thailand Biden, which appeared in 22 in German. Well, I am not a Weber scholar. If I am at all a scholar on a certain political thinker, I would call myself maybe a Schmitt scholar. But as you all know, there is they both met. They met in Munich. Schmitt was student of Weber, member of his class. at the University of Munich, they talked to each other, and Weber then also, Schmitt then also contributed to the commemorative volume after Weber's death, which then I think appeared in 23, whereas the original, the chapter which went into that became also a lone-standing book called Politische Theologie, Political Theology. So the English translation of the chapter, which refers to this relation between Schmitt and Weber, and which I would call a critique of Weber by Schmitt, has been circulated. The book itself is in German. That was the first attempt of translating that. That third, or in the numbering of the volume, the third chapter, but in fact it's the second substantial chapter, and namely on Nehmen, and Nehmen is in Schmitt's terminology the theory of the political, whereas heilen, to divide, is a theory of the legal, and weiden, to pasture, is the theory of the economics. So so the translation is far from perfect. I detected a couple of mistakes. I hope that it wasn't confusing. Of course, I'm much more happy with the German text, but well, anyway, we try to do this in English, and maybe you had a chance to look into the chapter, and maybe you. And I hope my main argument got across. So the text we are talking about is a kind of enigmatic text, and it has influenced many interpretations. And yeah, I think one is not overdoing the case if one is saying that this is one of the central text of the intellectual life of the 20th century, so to speak. It remained enigmatic in many sense. So the question, so we have very famous quotations which more or less entered into the canon of political theory. Sovereign is who can decide about the state of exemption. All modern concepts, or all concepts of modern state theory, are secularized theological concepts. So there are a couple of very well-known quotations, but the text itself has proved to be hermetic and enigmatic, and it provoked a very large number of interpretations. And one of the crucial questions or puzzles which the text itself provoked was, what exactly is theological in this text? Which kind of political theology does Schmitt try to promote with it, or to articulate? And and my thesis, which I'm happy to discuss with you, and where I'm very much looking forward to get feedback and criticism and comments, is that this is rather a wrong question, because my thesis is that Schmitt himself never wanted, and does not want with this text to develop a kind of political theology. I think what he does with this text, of course in a hidden form, is criticizing what he himself understands as Weber's political theology. In later texts, especially in Political Theology 2, which appeared in the early 70s, and which many understand as being a product of a controversy with Hans Blumenberg, he is very outspoken about Weber's political theology. So I have there some of the quotes where he where he says exactly that that Weber's theory of the charisma is a deformed deformed form of Protestant political theology and secularized theology. But of course, one could always be doubtful whether something he says in the early 70s is a true and honest interpretation of something he wrote in 1922 or even 1921. So, so the question remains, if we have any textual evidence or any kind of other evidence which would support this kind of thesis, saying what Carl Schmitt does in this 30-40 pages is providing a critique of Weber's theory of the three forms of domination or legitimacy of rule and Herrschaft, namely the traditional and the bureaucratic and the charismatic form of power or rule or domination, or however you would like to translate that. And my first, where I started myself puzzling what exactly Carl Schmitt does with this text is that it has political theology in its title. It is addressed to Weber. It is part of the commemorative volume for Max Weber. Carl Schmitt is very, very familiar with the concept of charisma because already in his habilitation in 1914, Der Wert des Staates und die Bedeutung des Einzelnen, so the value of the state and the significance of the individual, he engages with Rudolf Sohm, and Rudolf Sohm wrote, as you probably all know, this history of canon law, die Geschichte des Kirchenrechts, 2 volumes. And there, Rudolf Sohm does develop the notion of charismatic leadership and charismatische Herrschaft, so to speak. And I think it is not completely controversial if I say that Weber very much draws upon Rudolf Sohm in his own use of the concept of charisma as a sociological concept. So Carl Schmitt knows Weber personally. He is very, very familiar with his kind of sociology. He is his student in Munich, so to speak, or at least he is member of his this Privatissime class Weber gives in Munich. Carl Schmitt is very, very familiar with Rudolf Sohm's work. In fact, he has addressed Rudolf Sohm's work in 2 pieces, not only in his habilitation, but also in a short piece on the visibility of the church, a very small article which appeared in 1916, but which is of high significance for Schmitt's own theory of representation and organization and authority and legitimacy. So and this all comes together. And of course, Carl Schmitt is a staunch Catholic. And of course, both Weber and especially Sohm propose a very Protestant view of the Christian churches, so to speak. So all this comes together, but there is the title Political Theology, but Schmitt never ever mentions charismatic leadership or charisma in the whole text. So this is a kind of negative evidence, I would say. Although the notion saying all concepts of modern state theory are secularized theological concepts, that is a sentence that would, I think, fully apply to charisma, to the notion of charisma. Sohm's work, Geschichte des Kirchenrechts, History of Canon Law, written by a legal scholar, as Schmitt is a legal scholar and as by training Weber is also a legal scholar, argues in a very, very pronounced way that law and Christianity cannot go together. You cannot judicialize something which cannot be judicialized, namely the Christian faith. So there's a very strong argument, and it's a very Protestant, and it's a strong argument of German cultural Protestantism of the late 19th century, looking back at the early Christian, the primitive Christian churches, and arguing very, very strongly that these churches were charismatic communities and had no legal side to it. In fact, the legal was an enemy of Christianity. That's one of the central, very strong, very stark arguments by Rudolf Sohm. And I think one can imagine how much this must have provoked somebody like Carl Schmitt, being Catholic and being a legal scholar and believing in the organization of the church as a legal entity representing, so to speak, the succession of Christ through the centuries. And so so in his original work, 1916, he has a very short but very substantial discussion of Sohm, and that discussion is not provoked by this Kulturkampf dimension of Sohm's thesis, but rather asking, well, what happens if the idea enters into reality? And in which form does it take? What is the consequence of the form? What is the Substantielle der Form? What is the substance of the form? And of course, he's interested in the legal form. And of course, asking this at the end of the 19th or the beginning of the 20th century, it's interesting how religion comes into the world. And then the question is, does it come into the world in a legal form or not? And of course, the Sohm argument is no, it could not and it should not. Once it became legal, it was a deformation, a distortion, an aberration, eine Entartung des Glaubens, so very strong words. So the Catholicism, that's the main thesis of Rudolf Sohm, is a deformation and distortion of Christianity. And it's really, and then there's a whole argument about the bureaucratization and priests having an own interest of formalizing this, and it's a kind of, and this is all a kind of, how do you say, it's eine Verfallsgeschichte. And then Luther, in the sense, is something which is able to go back and to rejuvenate Christian belief and also in a kind of charismatic form of the role of the Protestant priest, so to speak. So my first argument would be to say, well, I think it's striking that Schmitt is never ever once mentioning the concept of charisma while he is talking about political theology in the form as in the context of modern state theory, saying, well, what we are confronted with secularized version of originally theological concepts. My second argument is that we very much have to look at a work where Schmitt says he writes it at the same time, exactly at the same time, namely that Roman Catholicism and political form. And if we take this two together and read this as one argument, I think we see a very strong argument saying this concept of the kind of duality which we have in Weber's political theory, namely we have either tradition or bureaucratic rule as something which defends and protects the status quo, so to speak, and then we have episodes of charismatic interruption and intervention that he criticized these in these two texts, and that he says, no, we have a substance of the form, and the form has to be legal, and the legal form is is related to some idea or some authority, and in the case of the Catholic Church or in the Christian Church, of course, it's the idea of God and the Christ coming into the world, and then the Church as a succession of Christ. So I think that we have many textual, of course, hidden in the political theology hidden. It has to be hidden because it was part of a commemorative contribution to the Weber volume. A quite sharp critique of these understanding of the duality between routinization and normalization and legalism, and then the political comes only in as kind of charismatic interventions and interruptions. Whereas I think what he tries to at least shows that this comes from a very Protestant view, and one could also say this notion that das ist die begriffliche Verarbeitung der sozialen Struktur einer Zeit. So it's a kind of conceptual image which a social structure of a certain time has. I think it's directed towards the German Protestant university and towards the German Protestant intellectuals, whereas, of course, Carl Schmitt always felt alienated and exempt from that and as a kind of outsider, so to speak. So I think what he describes and what he observes is an emerging sociology which is not able to understand its own sociological or societal and temporal roots, namely a kind of cultural Protestantism which develops, it claims to develop some kind of law-like sociological analysis, but is very much time-bound, it's very much societal bound, and is very much confessional, denominational influenced by the time. So I think, there are many textual references. I don't think I have the time to address these all, but if we read Roman Catholicism and political form with underlying emphasis on form, on political form, I think we see that he's showing us that that there is a decision. So he wouldn't deny. So in a way, I think he discusses that one can have the position that really Christian belief is incompatible with the legal form and with canon law. But one could also have the position, and there is no way of scientifically deciding which is the right position, that and that would be the Catholic position, that that Christian belief has to have a legal form, so that the church has to be a legal entity with representation, with authority, with hierarchy, and representing an idea, and not and so this is juxtaposed against the kind of Protestant view, where we have die offizielle Ablehnung des Offiziellen. So we have a formless, charismatic, pneumatic, spiritual interpretation of the belief and its teaching, so to speak. But I think what he wants to make us, or what he wants to argue, is that first of all, there are these two positions, and both of them have a certain legitimacy. And I think also what he ultimately claims is that that one could not understand the political, and especially also the modern state, without referring to authority and idea and representation in the Catholic sense, to the form. Whereas Weber sees this as a Zweckverband, and so it's the it's the who has the means of domination, whereas the Schmittian position would be this is purely instrumental. This is a pure technique. We don't have to look at the means of domination. We have to look at the aims and the goals of domination. So what is the idea? What is the kind of authority? What is the will, or what is the so that would be basically my argument in this chapter. And yes, it has been circulated. I hope you had a chance to read it or to take a look at it. And I will not go into each and every citation, so to speak, or each and kind of evidence I'm trying to assemble. I just wanted to sketch the basic argument. So thanks a lot for your patience, and then looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manow. Let's now turn to Dr. Magalhães. You have the floor, Pedro. You have 10 to maximum 50 minutes to make your comments on the topic. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Joaquín. And thank you, first of all, to the Weber Scholars Network for the invitation. It's a pleasure to collaborate with the network. I have been involved on and off in the network's activities, a bit absent lately, contrary to my will, but I would like to be more present in the sessions. But I mean, I accepted immediately this invitation, because this topic, this intellectual encounter between Max Weber and Carl Schmitt, is really one of the most fascinating enigmas of 20th century thought. And I think that its interpretation has a relevance which still transcends the circle of intellectual historians. So, I mean, it matters today, or at least I think it should matter today, to all of those working in the broad field of the social sciences, who retain some capacity for critical self-reflection. So I think this is a really important text, also the political theology and the encounter between Weber and Schmitt, to reflect upon this. I read Philip Manow's book very eagerly once it was recommended to me by a fellow colleague in Helsinki, Ville Suuronen, who wrote a critical review of it. And I have to say that this is a particularly thought-provoking book. And I mean this, even though I don't agree with Manow, but we'll go to that later. But when I say thought-provoking, I mean this really in a non-banalized fashion. So we usually use this word thought-provoking, but to me, I mean, it gave me some sleepless nights, this book. I was really trying to cope with this argument, and even you know, my productivity as a civil servant grading exams was like being affected by the way in which I was trying to digest this important book, and especially, of course, the second chapter in the book, the one that was circulated here. Now, as I read it, and this is my interpretation, by reconstructing Schmitt's 1922 booklet Political Theology as in essence and fundamentally a veiled critique of Weber's concept of charisma, Philip Manow performs a very radical historicization, and I would even dare say a parochialization. I don't know if this word exists, but I will coin it here. Parochialization of Weber's thinking, and perhaps more broadly even a parochialization of the modern sociological imagination. So it's a very radical critique. However, in my view, this exercise in, on the one hand, deconstruction of Weber's thought and reconstruction, on the other hand, of Schmitt's thought, has its blind spots. And this is where I would like to focus my intervention upon. So if, on the one hand, it does shed critical light upon what one could call the underside of Weber's supposedly value-neutral, supposedly ideal-typical, context-independent categories. I mean, it does this in a brilliant and stimulating fashion. On the other hand, I think that it obscures the difficulties and hesitations of Schmitt's critique. A critique which, in Manow's rendering of it, acquires a cohesion and a degree of self-certainty and self-confidence that I think it lacks in the original 1922 text and throughout the 20s and 30s. So I will focus here my discussion on these difficulties and hesitations, which I believe mark Schmitt's thought throughout this period, let's say the 1920s and the early 1930s. So, a first question. Did Schmitt conceive these first three chapters of political theology as fundamentally a veiled critique of Weber's category of charismatic domination? I am not sure. I grant that a deep suspicion towards the category of charisma was, of course, ingrained in a Catholic thinker with Kulturkampf memories. I grant that Schmitt considered Weber an intellectual opponent in many important respects. And I also grant that this opposition either more explicitly and mostly implicitly emerges throughout political theology in many instances. However, I do to Schmitt's established, consolidated intellectual enemy was not Max Weber. It was Hans Kelsen, whom I believe to be the main target of political theology. These three, and then in the final version, the 4 chapters on the doctrine of sovereignty, they are first and foremost written against the renowned jurist who, in his 1920 book, Das Problem der Souveränität, put forth the very radical and bold thesis that the concept of sovereignty must be radically repressed. So, this is quoted in political theology. Muss radikal verdrängt werden. And sovereignty, I would like to know here as a side note, sovereignty is a concept that Weber himself used only very rarely. So if we write sociological writings, political writings, the concept of sovereignty appears rarely, sometimes in quotation marks, so always with some distance and reservation. But Weber didn't fight it like Kelsen did. So for Kelsen, this was a very important fight to sort of get rid of this concept of sovereignty that was incompatible with a pure theory of law and Kelsen's understanding. So what emerges from Schmitt's critique of Weber in political theology, and also already in Dictatorship, which is an earlier work, and I mean, in my view, I prefer to read political theology as a complement, as a polemical sharpening of the arguments that are developed in Dictatorship, rather than in this intertextual connection with Roman Catholicism and political form, as Philip Manow does. So I believe what we have there in Dictatorship, also Weber is not mentioned, but I think one could interpret the argument there as a critique of Weber's theory of rationalization, as marked by the replacement of personal by impersonal forms of authority. And I think that contrary to Weber, Schmitt claims there, argues there, that political modernity, by shifting the grounds of legitimacy from the transcendent God to the immanent people, that it actually multiplies the possibility of revolutions and opens up the possibility of an appeal to the people by many potential sovereign transformative dictators. So actually political modernity multiplies the possibility of personal forms of domination, rather than Weber's argument about rationalization, restricting the possibility of revolution and interruptions of rationalization. Now, in light of this reasoning, which Weber develops in his previous work on Dictatorship, I think that the omission of the concept of charisma in political theology, I think it has an alternative interpretation, or I think I will here offer it very tentatively, of course. I don't think that it is politeness that makes Schmitt abstain from confronting Weber's charismatic domination head-on and explicitly. I mean, after all, and as Philip Manow shows, Schmitt mocks Weber's sociological method as just a form of schöne Literatur. This is not politeness, I would say. So I don't think that it was some defensive politeness. I think the omission is better explained by a fundamental indecision on the part of Schmitt throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, a fundamental indecision on the political and theoretical value of charisma, or more broadly, of irrationalism or irrationalist forms of political thought. That Schmitt was split, hesitated on this issue. His attraction to an engagement with irrationalist thought emerges in every important text that he wrote in this period. In political theology, we have a paradigmatic instance of this, the reference to Kierkegaard, the Protestant theologian, in the end of the first chapter, I think, is an important instance of this attraction to our engagement with irrationalist thought. Then we have another one in the engagement with Georges Sorel and with the reflections on violence, the political theory of myth, which is the final chapter of Die geistesgeschichtliche Lage des heutigen Parlamentarismus. So also there, this engagement with irrationalism, where I don't see Schmitt really coming to terms with the problem. And I think more evidence for this indecision and hesitation can be gathered by reading Schmitt's reflection on the role of the plebiscitary president of the Reich in Der Hüter der Verfassung. So even though Schmitt refrains from attaching charismatic to plebiscitary, so you never have this connection between the two, as Weber connected the plebiscitary element with the charismatic element, of course. Schmitt argues that what is fundamentally pathological about the Weimar Constitution is Chalcenian parliamentary legality and social and political pluralism. Is what's pathological about the Weimar Constitution. It's not the plebiscitary element. So the plebiscitary element for Weber, as for Schmitt, in a sense, was viewed as a hope for salvaging German democracy. One might think, I mean, depending on your definition. And in this regard, I'm still on board with Wolfgang Mommsen in identifying here the affinity between these two texts. When Mommsen claims that this affinity exists, he is quoting essentially from these two books, Der Hüter der Verfassung and Legalität und Legitimität. So I'm still on board with that. So Schmitt did not propose the reinstatement of a Christian political theology. He was not a reactionary here. I agree with Philip Manow 100%, but he was at least as permeable as Weber to new secular modern political theologies. In particular, the myth of the homogeneity of the people, the reification and hypostatization of the collective subject of sovereignty, what the French theorist Claude Lefort referred to as this longing for people as one. This myth, which is a modern myth, acquires in Schmitt's theory of democracy, elaborated in his Verfassungslehre from 1928, it acquires a paradigmatic instantiation and theoretical development. So to conclude, and I think I am running out of time, Schmitt is no less a fragment of the dissolution of German idealism than Weber is, and I am not convinced that he, Schmitt, navigated the collapse of that huge philosophical edifice with more critical self-awareness than Weber did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. Now we will be taking questions. I had decided to take questions in the chat, and then I will read them out, as we thought it was the optimal way to conduct a question and answer session. But given that the number of assistants is not as big as this, I think it's better, so a traditional method to ask questions and respond questions by the speakers, And if you would like ask question, it is simple to raise the hand and to ask the question. Perhaps one could say, who are you addressing the question to? But in case of both, then it's up to both, no problem. Also, if there are any questions about the presentation, Manow's presentation, and the comments of Pedro. Hey, Manu? No, not yet.
I can of course try to respond to the comments if that's wanted, or well, first of all, many thanks, Professor Magalhães. That is very stimulating, and it's very, how do you say, these are very good and substantial points. Well, we are confronted with very dense, complex, and partly, how do you say, enigmatic texts. So it's no wonder that not only we are not that we have different views on the text, but that well, generations and generations of scholars were are trying to are struggling with these texts. And well, I think there's obviously the case, as you said, that there is a strong and very explicit argument vis-a-vis Kelsen's theory of sovereignty. That's I think that's no doubt about it. I would also not say it's, so my argument would not be to say it's politeness, because, well, even this one passage about the sociological method where he more or less says, well, this is schöne Literatur, which of course itself is a kind of Weberian polemic. So he's using a term that Weber himself uses, so Literatentum und Tintenfass-Soziologie, and these are all notions which Weber, who has also a very polemic side to it, as you all know, uses in conflicts with other positions. So even there, this kind of schöne Literatur quote is not, so it comes 3-4 sentences later. So it's not that he directly equates Weber's sociological method, which makes this argument that we understand the judicial if we look at the Trägerschicht, at the carrier strata, and look who are the jurists, who are the legal scholars and the legal profession, so to speak. So even there, it's a kind of hidden, not a very brutal, open critique. So I wouldn't say it's politeness. Well, it's one could maybe say it some kind of decency, in the sense of, well, it would not be good custom to attack somebody completely frontal in a volume dedicated to that person. So in a way, we have, I think, this parallel some 40 years later, where Schmitt interestingly takes up again the debate on political theology, and contributes this initially to a Festschrift für Hans Barion, so the canon law theorist from Bonn, and his companion and intellectual partner in the 50s and 60s. And then if we look quite between the lines, well, it looks as if Schmitt is dealing with Monotheismus als politisches Problem, so the Patterson monograph of 1935. But as especially Spindler has argued, if we look closely, it is a response to Hans Marion himself, and it's a sharp critique of Hans Marion's position. And well, Hans Marion was alive at that time, and he was recognizing or noting it that Schmitt in fact wrote the harsh critique of Hans Marion's position. So well, we have an author who uses camouflage, who is he writes in a dark way. He's using deception, and he's not always that's a very special style of intellectual exchange which he is practicing. So I wouldn't call it politeness. It's really it has something like subversion and some undermining and eroding tendencies. So that I would still argue that this. So if, for instance, as far as I understand, as you try to argue that Schmitt is very much attracted by, so to speak, by the plebiscitarian leader, one is more or less even more surprised why he is not referring to charismatic leadership. Why doesn't he use this opportunity to be polite, so to speak, even if that really would also fit in? So if he himself would be attracted to this kind of political legitimacy. So so I'm fully granting the point that Kelsen, of course, is a target, but I would say that that's very clear because that's very explicit. But what makes this text so enigmatic and so fascinating is that there is never ever only the surface or the how do you say the visible attack, but there's also always an invisible attack or something hidden. And I would still, well, also if you look, I think at Glossarium and his Denktagebuch, his intellectual diary of the 50s, there we have many instances where whenever Weber appears, immediately Sohm appears. And I think this whole complex where say, well, the provocation of Sohm's history of canon law, and the quite strong link between Sohm's work and the charisma concept of Weber. I think that's quite, how do you say? For me, it's quite plausible that this must have provoked Schmitt very strongly, and that he somehow tries to attack that because he detects this as a intellectual anti-position, and already in 1916 he argues very strongly about the visibility of the church, about its legal form, about there is no invisible church without a visible one. So I would and this the anti-Catholic effect of the leading German university professors. I think this was all something which troubled him very much, and where he very much writes against this. So I take your point, but I would say that there is a layer, and I would say there's a strong layer in this political theology piece, which has exactly this connections to the question of what is the legal form, what has this to do with the church organization, and the history of the Christian churches, and how does that, or how has that influenced Weber's concept of charismatic rule.
Any further questions? Edith? Yeah.
Maybe it's a question and a comment, because my profession is the philological work on Weber. So was Schmitt triggered by the name, by the quotation of Rudolf Sohm? So I'm not sure when Weber starts reading Sohm or rereading the canon law of Rudolf Sohm. And yes, it's just published the reference to Sohm in 1920. That means very much later than the first writing of Carl Schmitt in 1914, his habilitation. So why does Schmitt mark, or this connection between Weber and Sohm? Because I think there are many, many roots of this conception of charisma. These are various, and this is, for instance, the relationship in the Stefan George Kreis. So Weber has many observations in his time, and I think the main point that he refers to Sohm is that Sohm described the sociological structure of charisma in contrast to the legal construction of the Roman Catholic Church. And so I'm not quite sure whether Sohm is so important as you highlighted it in your thesis. So I think there's a multiplicity of ideas, and I think it's very important that Weber, in comparison, took over many, many conceptions of his time, but he changed them. So, and I think without a form of generalization and extracting from the context of the concepts, we wouldn't have these categories of his late sociology. And I think when you stress on these conceptual meanings, cultural Protestant roots of the concept, I think it's a little bit, misleading, because then we wouldn't be able to use this concept of charisma to reflect other and to analyze other cultures. And I think it's very interesting to explain this concept historically, but I think it's a little bit too short to do it like that. So.
Yeah.
Can I say, can I try to answer this very briefly?
Of course.
That's very interesting, and how do you say, so the one answer to that would be, I'm not, so, or whether or Schmitt is right in identifying the Weber concept so much with Sohm, that would be another discussion. And I think you might be very much right in saying, well, narrowing this so much on this kind of lineage is a misinterpretation of Weber himself. So that might very much be the case. And but I would still insist that for Schmitt, there is this very, very strong nexus. You might say, no, Weber was influenced by different sources, and it's not only put Sohm into a different context. That might perfectly be the case, but I think in his and that might be the polemical and also the very confessional bias by Schmitt himself, that he instantly sees this as a kind of very, very Protestant story and Protestant conspiracies, so to speak. But so that would still allow for the argument that much what happens in political theology comes also, in a way, it's a Catholic view on this, and that might be very one-sidedness and very much biased. But I would still argue that this is that this is one of the strong motives and the strong impetus and the kind of hidden agenda of that text. Yeah. In a way, so from the chronological side, yeah, it's absolutely clear. And when in 14 is writing his habilitation, I don't think very much he is having that is a direct confrontation with Zoom and not with Weber. It's only later than that. But then, and then this is also maybe also still a comment to Professor Magalhães in this very special context of Munich, 1919, 1918, November Revolution, Kurt Eisner, the chaos, the anarchy, and Weber describing Kurt Eisner as a charismatic leader, as a prophet of the revolution. And Schmitt at the same time being having his job in the military located in Munich and responsible for censorship. So that would be a constellation where one doesn't think that Schmitt muses all the time about plebiscitarian and autocratic and dictatorial leadership, where he's rather troubled by that situation politically and is looking for order in a situation where there is so much revolutionary upheaval and danger of chaos and anarchy and of revolutionary leaders. That would be a quite different constellation, and it would rather trying not to interpret what he's writing in 21 with what he's writing in 27 or 28 when he's writing Verfassungslehre or so, but rather this very fresh memory of the turmoil of the November Revolution, especially in Munich.
Thank you. You have the floor, Peter. Peter, do you hear me? Do you hear me? Yeah. You have mute?
I'm sorry, are you talking to me?
Yes.
I raised my hand. All I can say is I'm afraid I agree with Edith. That, as you know, the first publication of the three prototypes of Herrschaft is not till the end of 1921. I mean, Schmitt is already a highly developed intellectual by that date. And I have to say, I'm a historian, so, and I take Professor Magalhães saying, well, we don't want to spend all our time with historians, with which I also agree. But as a historian, the question I would ask is, why on earth do we why spend time thinking about Schmitt's relationship with Weber? To which the obvious answer is they're both canonical authors. It's not anything to do with history whatsoever. Now, that may be, and indeed I'm sure is, an entirely reasonable thing to do, but that is in the realm of political theory. It is not in the realm of history, in all honesty. And personally, again, I'm afraid when I'm confronted by a text like Politische Theologie, I read it, I see no references to Weber. I see it's all about the Ausnahmezustand, it's about sovereignty and so on. None of these ideas have anything to do with Weber whatsoever. Sorry, in my humble opinion, anyway. So I'm afraid I didn't mean to be speaking at all, but somehow I got called upon. So forgive me if I say that I'm afraid I'm on the side of Edith and indeed Professor Magalhães. Sorry.
Thank you. It was a mistake also. It was Hanke Bruns that has...
Yes, but I have first to apologize. I have had not the time to read the texts sent by Philip Manow. So I just want to come back to the relationship between Schmitt and Weber. There's an interesting letter from 1970 in January, 50 years after the death of Weber. Schmitt writes to Julien Freund, and I quote the letter. He's writing in French. Continuez, cher Julien, à me tenir au courant de vos activités et pensées. Max Weber ne cesse pas de m'occuper. Le problème Politische Theologie me semble central pour Max Weber, surtout sa doctrine de la légitimité charismatique. Et il ajoute, Dieu est mort, la théologie reste, et les théologiens sont immortels. It's really amazing. But I think Weber himself formulated his interest in the correlation between religion and politics in quite a different way. He was interested by the various forms of the relationship of political power to religious power, the power of the church. In other words, and I'm quoting partially, he observed the forms of the fusion of theocratic or Caesar-Papist elements with a legitimate political power regardless of its structure. And he emphasizes that the relevant system is not dependent on the measure and importance that the people grants to religion as such. I think, but I'm perhaps a mistake, that is very different from the way of Schmitt, in which Schmitt interpreted the relationship between the nature of political theology.
Yeah.
This is a question to Philip Manow, who is a specialist of Schmitt.
Mm-hmm. Manow?
Well, I found this Julian Freud letter extremely interesting, and I think I saw it, and I think it confirms that which you can also take from the glossarium and of course from political theology too, and his exchange with Hans Blumenberg and so on and so on. So he is continuing to thinking about this relationship, and he's continuing thinking about Weber. There's if you simply search for Weber in the glossarium, it's I think it's you get something like 20 or 30 quotations, and all the time charisma is something which pops up, so to speak. And then in the glossarium he even has this very mocking, as Schmitt from time to time does, this poem about charisma auf jeden Fall, so about Führer and Lenker and Denker, and then it's highly polemical and very funny in a way also. So I would argue that for Schmitt himself, he is very obsessed with this linkage. But one can of course question whether this is a very fair and full representation of Weber's concept, but that he always links this also in the quotation, that something like asceticism and as a Berufsaskese and also charismatic leadership can only be developed in the context of the Protestantisches Pfarrhaus, the Protestant patronage is I think all this is, you have a lot of evidence for this being how do you say, a very important motive and a very important theme which pops up time and again. I have a little bit been distracted because I read the chat in parallel, and in the chat there was this question: what about Weber's and kind of revanchist position against the Versailles Treaty, and isn't there something where Schmitt and Weber are on the same plane, so to speak, and what does this tell about the relationship? So I'm not sure whether I have fully understood your question, and maybe the second part of your question, Mr. Bruns, and maybe you should repeat it once again. I just wanted to ask this question about their position. So if you read, I think if you read the diaries of Schmitt, the war diaries, 1914 to 1919, one is surprised how little chauvinistic Schmitt is, how skeptic he is, how he hates the war, how he is really has a lot of fear, but never. It's astonishing for the time how little chauvinistic these diary entries are, and so that might also be something where a Catholic is not really identifying with this Prussian military. So one is maybe having this image of Carl Schmitt from the 30s in mind, one would expect him to be a strong pro-war and maybe even an expansionist and so on, and a revanchist and a chauvinist, but there is very, very little evidence from the time for that. So in a way, his remarks about Weber's chauvinism right after the First World War, I think these are quite honest statements in the sense that Schmitt never was very much enthusiastic about the German case in the First World War. But please, Mr. Bruns, sorry, I was a little bit distracted from the chat. Could you repeat the second part of your question once again?
Vielleicht sage ich es auf Deutsch.
Ja.
Es ist dann vielleicht auch. Meine Frage war einfach, ob den Zusammenhang zwischen Theologie und Politik, ob Schmitt Weber da richtig interpretiert. Nur eine kleine Bemerkung, wenn man die politischen Schriften Webers nimmt, also die hier Weber zur Politik im Weltkrieg, also nicht die systematische politische Analyse, sondern die politischen Schriften, da kommt das Wort Charisma ein einziges Mal vor, noch dazu aus dem Mund von Ferdinand Tönnies. Also es ist auch augenblicklich in der französischen Forschung, Weber-Forschung, viele junge französische Weber-Forscher interessieren sich für das Charisma. Das erwundert mich ein bisschen. Und die Interpretation der plebiszitären Führerdemokratie, auch da muss man ja sagen, das kommt nur ein einziges Mal vor bei Weber. Und man muss das Ganze aus dem Kontext verstehen. Auch das, was Sie zu Recht als chauvinistische Äußerungen bezeichnen, die in der Biografie von Kaube so stark hervorgehoben werden. Ja? Da ist, wenn man die Zeitzeugen nimmt, es gibt da ein Zitat von Heinrich Blücher, also dem Mann von Hannah Arendt, der Weber interpretiert in dieser Zeit 1819 als jemand, der an der Nation, an Deutschland verzweifelt. Und aus dieser psychologischen Notlage sind diese Äußerungen zu verstehen, vor allem wenn man bedenkt, dass Webers ganzes politisches Denken im Weltkrieg von 1914 bis 1918 unter der Frage stand, nicht Nationalismus, Machtpolitik, Chauvinismus, sondern wie kann man einen erfolgreichen Frieden erreichen? Und erfolgreicher Friede heißt hier, wie kann man die innere und äußere Konsolidierung der deutschen Nation herstellen? Also eine ganz sachliche Frage. die Webers ganzes Denken in dieser Zeit bestimmt.
Darf ich auch eine kleine Frage stellen? Ja. Meine Frage wäre, am Ende des Lebens Webers, im posthumen Artikel veröffentlicht in den preußischen Jahrbüchern, macht so, hat ein Konzept, ein Begriff vom Charisma, das vielleicht nicht ganz mit den anderen älteren egal ist. Da er hat, glaube ich, die Charts, also alles andere Begriffe, nicht alle oder nicht ganz ausgenommen und er distanziert sich wissenschaftlich vom Sohn und Charisma ist dann der Begriff für etwas Außerordentliches. Nur das, außerordentlich. Aber das ist kohärent, also mit dem Phänomen, den er im 3. Kapitel der Soziologie der Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft, das Phänomen von Veraltlichung des Charismas, Transformation des Charismas. Und es sind verschiedene Varianten, verschiedene Möglichkeiten, aber im Grunde genommen die gemeinsamen Sachen mit anderen Herrschaftstypen ist, der Charisma-Herrschaft ist außerordentlich und kann converse oder kann transform in ordinarie Herrschaft, in ordinarie Herrschaft. Und da ist also für uns Spanier, Franzosen, Portugiesen der Begriff der Veralltäglichung. So, wenn wir die Veralltäglichung als Kotidianisation, so eine Sache von Tag zu Tag übersetzen, glaube ich, verstehen wir nicht. Veralltäglichung ist die Veränderung der außerordentlichen Herrschaft in eine ordinäre Herrschaft, wie die traditionelle oder die legal-rationale. Wenn das so ist, dann viele Betrachtungen, viele Reflexionen über die Rolle des Charisma früher und danach, glaube ich, vergisst, was Weber am Ende seines Lebens sagt. Das war geschrieben 1919, sagen die Herausgeber der Gesamtausgabe, aber veröffentlicht nur in 1922 in den preußischen Jahrbüchern. Und da kommt auch eine der Transformationen des Charisma in ordinäre, in nicht außerordentliche Herrschaftstyp. Zum Beispiel die plebiszitare Herrschaft, nicht plebiszitare Demokratie, sondern plebiszitäre Herrschaft, als eine Art Kombination, eine gemischte Typ von charismatischer Herrschaft und legaler Herrschaft. Und ein Fall von diesem plebiszitären Herrschaft ist die plebiszitäre Demokratie als der Begriff bezogen auf die Transformation der politischen Parteien und honorativen Parteien zu bürokratisierten, zu plebiszitären Parteien. Die sind also die Texte, die am meisten vergessen sind. Herr Mommsen in dem berühmten Artikel 1961 vermisst das. Er sagt, plebiszitäre Demokratie ist auf dieser Seite und das stimmt nicht. Stimmt jetzt bei der Max Weber Gesamtausgabe, Römisch 1, Römisch 7, 3,7, ne? Wo ist die Politik als Politik in Beruf? Das ist der 17, ne?
Meinst du die Staatssoziologie-Vorlesung?
Nee, die Politik als Beruf.
17.
17, ja. 17. Da auf der Seite 204, da erscheint das Wort plebiszitäre Demokratie. Und Mommsen in den schon gemeinten Artikel schreibt er nicht plebiszitäre Demokratie, sondern plebiszitäres System. Wenn Weber dort vom den Einzug des plebiszitären Demokratie und er analysiert dieses Phänomen in den USA und in Großbritannien, wo diese Ostrowski und Bryce haben so beschrieben, wie die Transformation dieser Parteien gewesen war. Das ist eigentlich der Fakt, wo Weber plebiszitäre Demokratie nennt. Weil ein paar Linien danach sagte Weber, dieses Phänomen dann, mit anderen Worten gesagt, ist der Einzug der plebiszitären Demokratie. Und diese plebiszitäre Demokratie wird analysiert in Großbritannien und in den Vereinigten Staaten. Und das bedeutet, dass plebiszitäre Demokratie keine Art of Demokratie ist, keine cäsaristische Variante der Demokratie ist, sondern weil gerade die plebiszitäre Demokratie hat sich in den Vereinigten Staaten und in Großbritannien entwickelt und beide sind keine plebiszitäre Demokratie in dem Sinne später bei anderen Leuten. Wenn plebiszitäre Demokratie wurde in Großbritannien parlamentarische Monarchie und in den Vereinigten Staaten eine Präsidialrepublik, plebiszitäre Demokratie bedeutet überhaupt nicht eine Klasse, eine Typ Demokratie. Und ich glaube, das führt zu verlangt eine Überarbeitung, eine Revision der Sachen, die bisher gesagt wurden. Nicht hier in this event, but in vielen Büchern. Und ich kann ganz klar, auch in Politik als Beruf, als Weber schreibt, hier haben England. Wir werden in England wie diese plebiszitäre Demokratie, wie dieses Phänomen der Transformation des Parteien stattgefunden hat. Und dann 10 Seiten danach schreibt, und jetzt die Vereinigten Staaten, wo die Einzug der plebiszitären Demokratie viel sehr radikaler war als in England. Deswegen die Voraussetzung, das steht in Mommsen 1961, ist eine Art of Demokratie, ich glaube, kann nicht richtig sein. Weil Demokratie für Weber nicht eine Staatsform oder Staatsregierung ist, sondern diese ganz reduziert an dieses Phänomen. Natürlich, dieses Phänomen, die Transformation der politischen Parteien, die Bürokratisation und so weiter und so fort, haben Effekte, Resultate, Konsequenzen gehabt über den Lauf der Politik. Aber im Grunde genommen der Begriff bezieht sich auf diese Tatsache. Die Parlamentarier, die Abgeordnete im Parlament, die früher die Herren der Elektoren waren, sind jetzt die Diener geworden der politischen Parteien und ihrer Lieder. Das steht auch in Kapitel 3 der Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft. Also das ist in dem Band 32, Seite 487. Das ist das Phänomen. Und dieses Phänomen, der Name dieses Phänomen ist Demokratia plebiszitäre Demokratie. Ja, Leo, es que no, bueno. Sí, no sé si la quieren responder. Das ist, Mano, haben Sie den Chat gelesen?
Yeah,
Álvaro Morcillo geschrieben hat?
Yeah.
Alles?
Yeah. I've tried to respond to the first part of the question, or the first question in the chat. I cannot say something substantial, I think, to the second question. This is beyond my expertise, I guess.
Para Pedro Magalhães.
But I would like to respond to what you just said, Professor Abellán, and also what Hinek Brun said before. So again, and I think this is also a response to Edith Hanke. So it may well be, and I think it's very persuasive that what Schmitt attacks is what is a kind of, how do you say, it's something what he thinks of Max Weber's concept of the political, and one could probably argue that he is attacking a phantom or a very biased and unfair and unjust version of what Weber's theory of the political, especially of charismatic, of charisma is. So that I wouldn't, I think that is not necessarily part of a controversy, and I have much too little expertise on Weber to really participate in that discussion. I would still say yes, but I would still say that the dimension is relevant in the text. So one could argue for or against what Schmitt sees here as a particular Protestant version of the political, and a very time bound and a very, in a way, German. So a very how do you say, a very temporally and socially and denominationally special view on the world, which itself claims to be a kind of neutral and universally applicable theory. But that would be a different discussion, I would say. But so I would simply insist that there is this dimension, and I would. And I think it's not so surprising that there's this dimension, given that you have this very, very strong denominational cleavage between those positions, and I would say, in a way, maybe Schmitt, even if he is distorting or misperceiving what the whole complexity and the different sources of Weber's concept of charisma, but in a way, I think he also sees the blind spot of this because he's taking a Catholic perspective, so to speak, and then I think there's a second dimension. Maybe we haven't talked so much about it, but at least in my chapter, I am referring to it, of course, in the sense of theory of secularization. I think what maybe Schmitt is also in a very good position to see it is that sociology itself is taking part in the process of secularization, whereas it claims to explain it. I think Schmitt makes very lucid and very interesting remarks that sociology itself is the process of secularization and is kind of and so he of course he has a very, how do you say, skeptic and cynical and even he mocks, he pokes fun at the at sociologists. So there is even a second, then there is another motive of being skeptical and of attacking and of trying to subverting this kind of literature or this kind of science, because Schmitt sees it not as something analyzing secularization, but of taking part in it and promoting it and driving it forward, so to speak. That would be still another layer, I think, which is in the text. And then also, of course, in Roman Catholicism and political form, because there he makes he writes about Comte and pokes fun at Auguste Comte and yeah.
Okay, may I just respond to Alvaro, or try to be useful to Alvaro? I mean, I have to confess there my ignorance when it comes to the intellectual milieu of Munich in the 20s. So I really don't know about these people that you mentioned, but I would like to make this point, which is it's a textual point. So if you look at the version of the text that is published in the Erinnerungsgabe, so it comes out in 1923, and if you compare the text with the Winkelmann exemplar, which is 1922, there is only one difference between the two texts, as far as I could gather. And it is that in the Erinnerungsgabe für Max Weber, you have there a reference by Schmitt to the legal theorist Erich Kaufmann. It's a reference to a book called Kritik der neukantischen Rechtsphilosophie. Now, for me, the chronology is not very clear here. So, I mean, I would perhaps, if someone knows about the Entstehungsgeschichte der Erinnerungsgabe, perhaps could be some illumination here, but I don't know whether Schmitt erased or tried to take away this quotation when he published the booklet, or whether he tried to add it to the 1923 edition. But here, I mean, in this book, the Kritik der neukantischen Rechtsphilosophie, it is actually a book that ties in with Weber, with Schmitt's critique of secularization. And this critique applies not only to sociology, but it applies to legal theory. So basically what Erich Kaufmann says, criticizing Kelsen is, Kelsen, you claim to be an anti-metaphysical thinker, but you are merely turning pure concepts of law, your pure concepts of law, with turning them into metaphysische Kampfbegriffe, metaphysical, ideologically charged concepts. And isn't this also, in essence, also the argument, now this is now to Manow, isn't this also the argument against sociology in this context of secularization? So the thesis would apply equally well to the view of secularization that is implied both in sociology as in legal theory or positivistic legal theory.
Any further questions? Any report? Sergio D'Amata. To Pedro.
I'd like to make this question for both of the the professors. I think this theme is huge, especially here in Latin America. And strangely, the concept, as in France, I would like to hear the concept of charisma is very much studied, but Schmitt's concept of political theology doesn't play a role here, and I don't know why, because it is very operative, I think. But my question is, our discussion dealt with the problem of the sources of Schmitt's concept of political theology. If I rightly understand you, Herr Manow centralizes his explanation in the link between Schmitt and Weber's concept of charisma. And Pedro Magalhães has a broader perspective. He thinks other authors played also a role. So I think that the concept of political theology should be understood in a broad sense. So that means what are the political implications of religious phenomena or ideas? In this sense, it is strange that Schmitt doesn't evoke or doesn't quote authors that wrote about it at the beginning of the 20th century, like Georg Jelinek in his Erklärung der Menschen- und Bürgerrechte from 1895, or even Ernst Troeltsch in his Der Protestantismus and die Entstehung der modernen Welt. There is a whole chapter in which Troeltsch analyzes the political consequences of the modern Protestantism. So, as we know, Schmitt was not a friend of the neo-Kantians, but my question would be for Herr Manow. But if Pedro likes to say something about it, it would be great. Do you have some explanation, Herr Manow, for this obsession of Smith for Weber's concept? It's a very simple question.
Then Pedro, Professor Manow.
Well, I always are in danger of going beyond my expertise. As far as I understand, so I think as far as I understand, I think Sohm's work, there is a special potential for provocation. And as far as when you compare this maybe to Troeltsch or to Jelinek, but again, I have to say that I'm not really a scholar which can claim that he has a very good overview about these times and these works. I would say it's the Kulturkampf potential of these contributions are much less developed, so to speak. So I could understand why, and I would say, as far as I understand, the first interest of Schmitt wasn't so much maybe in the Protestant character of Sohm's thesis. It was rather understanding what the legal form does with its content or with its substance. So it's a highly abstract law philosophical interest which he has in 1914 or even before in 1912 in Gesetz und Urteil. So it's really about philosophy of law. and for him, I think that is the entry, and then only maybe later, or as a kind of byproduct, the kind of, how do you say, the denominational conflict comes into play. But in the main so the Summa publication is a kind of, how do you say, it's a side publication in a Catholic journal, but the main publication is really then on questions of the philosophy of law, about, you know, what does the form do with the substance, so to speak. So yeah, but so when I think then maybe it's also a kind of coincidence that he then you know, meets Weber 1919 in Munich, that he becomes a student of him in this class, and that he then even is asked to contribute to this. And so for him, it might have been simply an occasion or an opportunity to link these different strands of discourse and legal thought and sociological thought. Yeah.
I think we müssen langsam zum Ende kommen. The time is goes off. And a short question, no? No? Anything more? Then we finish this, the session. Thank you very much for all contributions, especially my thanks for the organizer, especially for Dr. Edith Hanke, and for the speakers, Mr. Manow, the comments of Mr. Magalhães, all interventions that have been take place this evening. I think it has been a fruitful, a useful, a helpful meeting, and I hope we meet again with other topic.
Yes, thank you so much to all participants. And the next meeting will be on 14th May. And Pedro, maybe you can announce it by yourself because you are involved next time. So we just want to advertise the next meeting.
So it will be a meeting on the links, the connection, the importance of Weber to the circle of Socialisme ou Barbarie, which is a circle of French philosophers, namely I'm talking about Claude Lefort, Castoriadis, and how they have made use, reinterpreted, criticized some of Weber's ideas. So it will be the next seminar. And I invite you all to join, of course.
Yes, thank you so much and have a nice day or evening and see you next time. Bye.